Why was she the only one not laughing? The water came down in steady sheets, cold, indifferent, hissing against tile and steel. The shower room echoed with nervous energy, the kind of laughter that wasn't joy but fear disguised as mockery. Sarah Mitchell stood beneath a corner showerhead, her back to them, her frame lean against the harsh white light. She didn't flinch. She didn't rise. She let the water do what it always did, wash away the noise, the doubt, the smallness of other people's words. They thought she didn't hear them. Marcus Thompson, 22, broad-shouldered, full of Texas bravado, smirked at his friend Jake Williams. His whisper wasn't really a whisper at all. Look at that. They're really letting anyone in these days. The comment sparked snickers, too loud, too eager. It spread like fire in dry brush. I bet she won't last a week, Jake added, his voice bouncing off the tiled walls. This isn't some fitness boot camp for soccer moms. The room roared with cheap laughter. Sarah kept washing, calm, deliberate, the soap sliding down skin crisscrossed with scars they didn't even notice. She had heard it all before. Different voices, different languages, different barracks in far-off places. Always the same tune. She was too small, too slight, too quiet. They didn't know the missions her hands had touched, the lives she had pulled from fire, the commands she had given that meant survival or silence for her team. They saw a woman, not a warrior, and she let them. Danny Rodriguez chimed in from the back, trying to earn a place in the group. Maybe they put her in the wrong program, the spas down the hall. The laughter spiked again, rattling in their own ears, bouncing back at them like false courage. Sarah's lips pressed together, the barest hint of a smile tugging at her face, not humor but patience. She reached for the towel, wrapped it around her shoulders, and in the chrome reflection of a faucet caught their faces all at once. The bravado was paper-thin, boys in the skins of men, nervous, insecure, desperate to prove they belonged. They didn't know she had already belonged for years. 8 years of carrying weight these men had never touched. Missions nameless, filed away in classified vaults, where failure was an embarrassment, it was death. Marcus wasn't done. He couldn't be. He needed their laughter to mask his fear. I wonder if she even knows how to hold a rifle. Maybe she's here to cook for us or something. The echo hit the room harder than the water. Sarah turned. For the first time she met their eyes, calm, even. No anger, no pride, just the steady look of someone who had stood across from far worse men and never blinked. A few shifted uncomfortably, though none admitted why. Something in her gaze unsettled them, something they couldn't name. But the moment passed, and bravado returned. "Don't worry, sweetheart," Jake called as she headed for the exit. "We'll go easy on you tomorrow." More chuckles. Sarah walked out in silence, the towel snug around her shoulders. On her lips, the faintest smile, the kind you wear when you already know how a story ends. They thought they had set the terms. They thought they had won the first battle. They had no idea that by dawn the battlefield would shift and their laughter would turn to silence. Because tomorrow they would see. The alarm hit at 500. Sirens tearing through barracks, boots hitting concrete floors, groans of men who thought early wake-ups were punishment. Sarah had been awake 30 minutes already. Old habit. In war zones, you learned quickly being ready before the day began was often the difference between walking back and not walking at all. She dressed with precision, every crease sharp, every fold perfect. Discipline wasn't a rule for her, it was muscle memory. Around her the recruits stumbled, rubbing eyes, swearing under breath. Marcus was loudest, Jake close behind. "What is this torture?" Marcus muttered. Sarah listened but didn't answer. 5 a.m. was mercy. In the field, days began in the pitch of night. In the field, the clock didn't ask permission. They assembled outside, lined in messy formation as Staff Sergeant Collins barked them into attention. Collins was old school. Every scar on his face told a story the recruits would never hear. His voice rolled like thunder across the training ground. "Today, You will begin to understand what it means to be a warrior. Some recruits stiffened, some smirked. They were still children in uniforms playing at soldier. Colin's eyes narrowed. You will be tested physically, mentally, emotionally. Some of you will rise, some will fail. By the end, you'll know who you are. Sarah stood in line with them, face blank, heart calm. The boys didn't know she wasn't one of them. Not yet. They ran laps first. Marcus puffed hard by the third circuit, sweat pouring down his neck. He tried to pull up alongside Sarah, still looking for an audience. Trying to keep up, he managed between gasps. Sarah didn't answer. Her stride didn't break, her breathing steady as a metronome. She had run marathons in full combat gear across heat and sand, bullets chewing the earth at her feet. This wasn't running. This was warming up. By the fifth lap, Marcus had fallen behind. His cocky grin was gone, replaced by the grimace of a man realizing strength wasn't what he thought it was. The obstacle course came next. A 20-foot wall stood before them, paint chipped, ropes dangling like old scars. Marcus charged first, fueled by pride. He leapt, clawed, slid down hard, tried again, failed again. His muscles bulged, but technique failed him. By the third attempt, his palms were bleeding. Jake tried after him. He did better but still struggled. Halfway up, then back down, his breath ragged. Sarah stepped forward last. She studied the wall, quiet. Hands found rope, feet found rhythm, her body moving with precision that was almost art. In seconds, she was over. No showboating, no smile, just movement, clean, efficient, done. Colin's brow twitched, the smallest flicker of recognition in his eyes. He'd seen it, technique no recruit carried, not on day one. Murmurs rippled down the line. Marcus stared, jaw tight, chest heaving. He didn't speak this time. Weapons training followed. The recruits held rifles like toys, fumbling grips, jerking triggers. Targets stayed blank, holes scattered wide. Sarah took her place, stance perfect, breath slow, finger feathering the trigger. Her first shot cut the center. The second landed on top of the first. The third buried itself in the same wound. A cluster so tight it looked like one hole. Collins didn't miss it. The recruits did. They weren't paying attention, not yet. Later tactical exercises paired Sarah with the very boys who had mocked her in the showers. Marcus, Jake, Danny, others. The irony tasted sweet, though she never let it show. They fumbled through, shouting orders, stepping over each other, arrogance crumbling in confusion. Sarah let them lead, but when decisions had to be made, her voice slipped in firm, quiet, correct. They didn't notice then, not fully, but the seed was planted. Something about her steadiness under pressure was different. Something about the way she never raised her voice but still got movement. By noon, their laughter had thinned. They didn't understand why they felt uneasy around her. Not yet. But they would. That night, lying in her bunk, Sarah stared at the ceiling. The whispers of the day had faded into the deep breathing of exhausted recruits, but her mind was elsewhere, on the field, on the past. The scars along her back itched where the water had touched them. Not physical, but memory, faces she had led, some that never came home, the kind of weight you carried in silence because to speak it aloud made it too real. She thought of the shower, the laughter, the way their words bounced harmless off her skin. It wasn't new. It wasn't even cruel, not in comparison to what the world could be. But it was the same old story. People always thought they could read strength at a glance. They couldn't. And tomorrow, the lesson would begin. Not just in obstacle courses or firing ranges, not just in sweat and bruises, but in the quiet, merciless reality that strength has nothing to do with size, nothing to do with gender, nothing to do with noise. It has to do with surviving, with leading, with knowing who you are when the world wants to break you. Tomorrow, the recruits would learn. They just didn't know yet who would be teaching. Why did the air feel heavier this morning? The sun hadn't even cleared the horizon when the recruits assembled on the training ground. Boots scraped against gravel, hands tugged nervously at straps and belts, bodies still sluggish from too little sleep. The desert air was sharp, cool at first, but the promise of heat already hung there, waiting to press down like a hammer. Sarah Mitchell stood among them, silent, posture exact, as though the uniform itself had chosen her. Around her, the men fidgeted. Jokes still flickered between them, but they didn't land the way they had the night before. Laughter was thinner now, forced. Marcus Thompson's jaw clenched as he rolled his shoulders. Jake Williams rubbed his neck, eyes bloodshot. Danny Rodriguez, normally quick with a smirk, seemed distracted, scanning the compound as though he expected something, or someone to appear. They were waiting for instruction, waiting for direction, but they didn't know who was already standing beside them. Staff Sergeant Collins emerged from the shadows like thunder in boots. His voice cracked across the morning like a rifle shot. Formation. The recruits snapped into line, some straighter than others. Sarah's movement was flawless, unthinking, perfectly measured. Collins paced, eyes sharp, his presence heavier than the desert air. Yesterday you thought you were tough. You thought showing up here was enough. Today you'll learn the truth. And the truth doesn't care how strong you think you are. The truth doesn't care how loud you laugh. His gaze lingered on the row of fresh faces, but his words carried something deeper. Like a warning, most of them weren't ready to understand. "Run," Collins barked. And they did. The ground shook beneath 30 pairs of boots, dust rising with every step. Sarah settled into her pace immediately, calm, unhurried, steady as a drum. For her, it was rhythm. For them, it was war with their own bodies. By the second mile, the complaints began. Marcus grunted, his breath shallow, sweat pouring down his temples. Jake cursed under his breath, fighting the stitch in his side. Sarah never broke stride. She remembered nights on deployment, running through Afghan valleys with 50 pounds of gear, lungs burning, bullets snapping overhead. She remembered the cold mornings in Coronado when the Pacific swallowed her whole, and the instructors' voices screamed that women didn't belong. This was nothing. Marcus tried again to prove himself, pulling up beside her. He looked at her from the corner of his eye, expecting to see strain, weakness. Instead, he saw calm. He tried to push harder, his chest heaving, legs burning. By the third mile, he fell behind, unable to match her silence. And the silence, that was what unnerved him most. The obstacle course loomed, jagged against the desert sky. A towering wall, cargo nets, mud pits, barbed wire stretched low, daring them to crawl. Collins planted himself at the start, arms crossed. This isn't about speed. It's about problem solving. It's about resilience. It's about showing me you can keep moving when you want to stop. Fail once, you try again. Fail twice, you try again. Fail 3 times, you don't belong here. The recruits exchanged uneasy glances. Some whispered bets. Marcus spat in the dirt, shaking out his arms. He charged first. His body slammed against the wall, fingers clawing for grip. He strained, pulled, slipped. The wall rejected him, his body sliding down to the dust. A murmur rippled through the line. He tried again. Same result. His arms burned. His pride burned hotter. By the 4th try, his hands shook. Jake followed, fueled by the chance to outdo his friend. He scrambled higher, but his form was sloppy, his legs kicking wildly as though the wall might give way if he fought hard enough. It didn't. He hung for a moment, then dropped, breath ragged. Danny's attempt ended even sooner. He barely made it halfway before gravity claimed him. Then Sarah stepped forward. She didn't run at it, didn't fight. She studied the wall as though it were an equation. Her palms found grip, her legs drove upward, each movement precise, efficient. She rose smoothly, not a wasted ounce of energy. And then she was over. Done. No noise, no celebration, just completion. Collins' eyes narrowed. He said nothing, but in his silence was recognition. He had seen that before. the fluidity of someone who had done this under fire, under pressure, when failure wasn't about embarrassment but about survival. The recruits shifted uncomfortably. Marcus scowled, heat creeping into his cheeks. He wanted to laugh it off, but the sound caught in his throat. Weapons training followed. Rows of rifles gleamed under the sun, barrels aligned like soldiers themselves. Collins barked instructions, demonstrating stance, grip, trigger discipline. Most of the recruits fumbled, fingers too tight on the trigger, breathing all wrong. Their rounds scattered across the targets, holes wide and uneven. Jake cursed after each shot. Marcus adjusted his stance over and over, frustration mounting with every miss. Sarah stepped to her lane. Her fingers closed around the weapon like it was an old friend. Her breath slowed, her eyes narrowed. The first shot landed dead center. The second pierced the first. The third buried itself in the same wound, until the target looked less like paper and more like truth. Collins' lips pressed into a hard line. He said nothing, but his gaze flicked toward her, unreadable. The others didn't notice, or maybe they pretended not to. By afternoon, the recruits faced their first tactical exercise. A mock village sprawled across the training ground, plywood walls painted in desert tones, alleys narrow and twisting. "Your mission," Collins announced, "is to move through, clear each sector, and extract the asset. You will do this as a team. No one succeeds alone." Teams formed quickly. Sarah found herself with Marcus, Jake, Danny, and another recruit named Walsh, the same voices that had mocked her the night before. The irony wasn't lost on her. They entered the village, rifles raised, nerves frayed. Marcus tried to take charge immediately, barking orders with the authority of someone who thought leadership was volume. Jake seconded him, his voice shaking but eager to echo power. Danny hovered between them, uncertain, while Walsh trailed nervously at the rear. Sarah said little. At first, they stumbled through the first alley, moving too fast, missing corners, exposing themselves. The simulated enemy fire cracked overhead, paint rounds slamming into walls, dust exploding around their boots. Marcus shouted, Jake cursed, Walsh panicked. Sarah's voice cut through it, calm, firm, direct. "Cover left, slow down, watch your spacing." They obeyed, almost without realizing it. At the next junction, Marcus charged ahead, nearly walking into crossfire. Sarah's hand shot out, pulling him back by his collar a split second before rounds peppered the wall where his body would have been. Her eyes met his. For a moment, the bravado drained from his face, replaced by something he didn't want to name. Fear. Respect. Something in between. By the time they reached the extraction point, their formation was a mess. Their communication fractured. Their asset lay rescued, but barely. Collins' critique afterward was sharp, merciless. He tore into their mistakes, every missed corner, every sloppy move. But Sarah, he said nothing about her, nothing at all. And silence sometimes says more than words. That night in the barracks, the energy was different. The jokes didn't come so easily. Marcus sat on his bunk, staring at his hands. Jake toyed with his dog tags, quieter than usual. Danny scribbled in a small notebook, his smirk long gone. They didn't talk about her, but they thought about her. Because somewhere in their gut, in the space where pride battled with truth, they knew something about Sarah Mitchell didn't add up. She wasn't what she seemed. She couldn't be. And tomorrow, they would start to find out why. Why did she move like that? That was the question none of them asked out loud, but all of them felt. The second morning came harder than the first. Muscles sore, lungs raw, nerves already frayed. They had imagined basic training as a gauntlet of push-ups and shouting. What they hadn't expected was the silence in themselves, the quiet doubt crawling under their skin after watching one recruit, one small, quiet, unremarkable woman, perform with an ease they couldn't explain. Sarah Mitchell rose before the alarm, as always. 30 minutes in darkness, boots laced, Uniform exact, her breath steady, mind already calibrated. The habits weren't for show. They were survival, burned into her from nights on missions where being ready half an hour early meant you were still alive when dawn came. The others stirred when the siren wailed at 500. Marcus cursed into his pillow. Jake rolled with a groan. Danny pulled his blanket tighter for 1 extra second, then scrambled to keep up. Walsh muttered something about insanity. But Sarah was already standing. The obstacle course was waiting. The sun rose higher, painting the compound in copper light. Heat began its slow climb, a promise of punishment yet to come. The wall loomed again, higher in their minds than in reality, its shadow long on the dust. The ropes dangled like taunts. Collins stood at the start, arms behind his back, eyes hard. Today we see what you learned yesterday. Don't repeat mistakes. Don't repeat weakness. Out here, repetition of error gets you killed. Marcus went first again. He couldn't not. His pride demanded it. He set his jaw, spat into the dirt, and hurled himself at the wall. Muscles straining, veins swelling, he clawed his way upward. For a moment it looked like he'd make it. For a moment he believed. Then his foot slipped, and the wall claimed him once more. Dust rose around him as he hit the ground. Laughter bubbled among a few recruits, but it was nervous now. Marcus pushed himself up, his chest heaving, humiliation thick in his throat. Jake tried next. He made it higher than yesterday, his determination etched in every line of his face. But his technique was wild, his energy unfocused. He reached, grasped, lost it, and came down hard, his palms raw. Danny refused to try twice. He dusted his knees, muttering about slick rope, about unfair footing. Excuses carried weight in his voice, but none in Collins' ears. Then Sarah stepped forward. The recruits fell silent, though no one admitted why. She didn't run, didn't fight. She simply studied the wall for one breath, one still moment, as though she were measuring its soul. Then she moved. Hands sure, feet certain, body flowing like water over stone. In seconds she was at the top. She paused there, not to gloat, not to mock, but to look out over the compound, her face unreadable. Then she descended, as clean as she had risen. When her boots touched the ground, she stood straight, calm, collected. The silence held. Collins gave the faintest nod, almost imperceptible, but he had seen, and they had too, whether they wanted to admit it or not. The weapon's range was worse. Targets lined up in neat rows, cardboard silhouettes daring the recruits to prove themselves. Rifles waited on racks, their steel gleaming in the sunlight. Collins gave the lecture: stance, grip, breath, trigger squeeze. Basics, fundamentals. Most of them nodded as if they understood. Most of them didn't. Jake fired first. His shots scattered wild, holes punching the outer rings of the target. He adjusted, grew frustrated, muttered curses between breaths. The paper stayed mostly clean. Danny did little better, his hands trembling despite his smirk. He laughed off his poor grouping, but the sound cracked thin, empty. Marcus tightened his stance, forced his breath. His rounds hit closer but wide, still far from the center. His jaw clenched tighter with every pull of the trigger. Then Sarah took her place. She handled the rifle like it was a memory, not a tool. Her stance perfect, her eyes narrow, her breath a rhythm. She raised, aimed, squeezed. The first shot tore the center. The second pierced the first. The third buried itself in the same wound. The recruits watched, though none spoke. The target didn't show 3 holes. It showed one, sharp and deep, as though the rifle itself had chosen its mark. Collins' expression barely shifted, but his silence was weight enough. By afternoon, sweat-soaked uniforms. The recruits dragged themselves to the mock urban village again, their faces pale under the desert sun. Collins barked the orders: teams, entry, extraction. Sarah found herself again with Marcus, Jake, Danny, Walsh. The same voices that had jeered in the showers now carried rifles beside her, their confidence thinner than the air. They moved into the village, nerves sharp, mistakes sharper. Marcus barked orders, his voice cracking with effort to sound commanding. Jake seconded him, always a beat behind. Danny stumbled, Walsh froze. Paint rounds cracked overhead. Simulated enemies pressed them from alleys. Marcus charged forward, exposing them all. Sarah pulled him back, her hand tight on his collar, saving him from being painted red in the chest. "Cover left," she said calm. They obeyed almost instinctively. Another junction, another mistake. Jake fired too soon, drawing fire back. Danny tripped in panic, nearly dropping his weapon. Sarah steadied him with a single hand, her eyes cutting through the chaos. "Slow, watch corners." Again they obeyed. By the end, the asset was technically extracted, but Colin's face was thunder. His critique came sharp, slicing through their fragile egos. "Sloppy, loud, reckless. Half of you would be corpses already." He didn't name names. He didn't need to. And again, he said nothing about Sarah. That silence burned hotter than any insult. That night, the barracks felt different. Marcus lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, hands behind his head, jaw locked tight. Jake rolled his dog tags between his fingers, eyes unfocused. Danny scribbled in his notebook, but no smirk touched his lips. Walsh stared at the wall as if it held answers. The laughter from the showers didn't return, not that night, not anymore. Because they had seen something they couldn't explain. Sarah wasn't just keeping up. She was beyond them, far beyond. But she wasn't showing off. She wasn't bragging, she was simply there, quiet, efficient, relentless. And that unsettled them more than anything. Marcus turned once, twice, then whispered, low enough only Jake heard, "What the hell is she?" Jake didn't answer, because he didn't know. And tomorrow, they would find out just how wrong they had been. Why was the air so heavy that afternoon? The recruits stood in formation, the desert sun burning into their necks, sweat collecting beneath collars, boots hot against gravel. It wasn't just the heat. It was something else, an edge in the air, a silence threaded with anticipation. Staff Sergeant Collins paced before them, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes sharp as blades. Normally his voice cut like thunder, but now even his silence carried weight. Sarah Mitchell stood among the recruits, her posture perfect, her face neutral. Inside, her heart was steady. She had seen this moment play out before with different faces, different boys trying to be men. The reveal was always the same: their arrogance, their humiliation, their awakening. But it had to be done right. It wasn't about her pride. It was about their survival. Collins cleared his throat. The recruits stiffened, spines snapping straighter. "This afternoon," Collins said, voice booming across the compound, "you will meet your new commanding officer for advanced tactical training." A murmur rippled through the line, quickly silenced. Marcus's eyes flicked sideways at Jake. Danny chewed his lip. Walsh blinked rapidly, the sun reflecting off his sweat. "This officer," Collins continued, "has more combat experience than all your instructors combined. This officer has led missions into places you can't pronounce, let alone survive. This officer has done what most of you can't even imagine." The recruits swallowed hard. Even Marcus, who usually smirked at every challenge, found his jaw tight, his throat dry. Sarah's face didn't change. She stood perfectly still, perfectly silent, as if she too were waiting. Collins' boots struck the ground with measured precision as he paced. "Your new commander has made decisions under fire that saved entire teams, has carried men bleeding through the dirt while bullets cut the air, has held the line when the world said it couldn't be done." Jake shifted his weight, uneasy. Danny glanced at Marcus, but for once Marcus had no words. "This officer," Collins went on, his tone hardening, "has earned decorations for valor that most of you will never even see on paper. This officer has bled, fought, and endured for this flag. And now this officer will shape you." The recruits straightened. Nervous energy pulsed down the line. Their bravado from the showers seemed years away. Marcus whispered under his breath, though too loud in the stillness. Probably some old-school hard case. Shouts a lot, breaks us down. A few chuckled softly. The sound didn't last. Sarah heard it, but her face remained unreadable. She had heard the same words 100 times in 100 training grounds. It never changed. The assumptions, the smirks, the ignorance. Collins checked his watch, then lifted his eyes to the horizon. Your commander should be arriving any moment. When they do, you will stand at attention. You will give respect, because this individual holds your future in their hands. The recruits froze, every muscle tight, eyes fixed on the barracks, the gate, the empty road. The sun beat down. The seconds dragged, sweat rolled across foreheads. No one moved, no one spoke. Minutes passed, still no commander appeared. Collins paced in front of them, his boots clicking, his voice low now but sharp as glass. You think you understand strength. You think you know leadership. You think you can measure warriors by what you see. You are wrong. The words pierced deeper than shouting ever could. Danny's stomach twisted. Jake's throat tightened. Even Marcus felt his chest grow heavy, though he wouldn't admit why. Collins stopped, turned, faced them with a look that was equal parts satisfaction and steel. Your commanding officer, he said, has already been observing you, every word, every laugh, every insult, every mistake, from the showers to the range to the field, nothing has been hidden. A ripple of shock tore through the line. Marcus's smirk fell, Jake's blood went cold, Danny's palms began to sweat. If their commander had been watching since the beginning, then. They remembered, the mocking, the jokes, the laughter in the showers, the careless words that had seemed so harmless, so funny. Now they felt like blades twisting in their chests. Collins' eyes swept over them like searchlights. What some of you fail to understand is that warriors rarely come in the package you expect. The ones who survive, the ones who lead, the ones who carry you out when you fall, they don't always look the way you think. Silence gripped the compound. The only sound was the faint hum of distant trucks and the pounding of their own hearts. Your commander, Collins said, his voice now rising like a storm, is someone you've already met. Someone whose strength you've already seen, though you were too blind to recognize it. Someone standing among you right now. Heads turned, eyes darted, confusion rippled like electricity. Marcus frowned, Jake blinked, Danny's mouth went dry. Among them. Sarah stood motionless, her face a mask, her posture unshaken. She had been here before. This moment, this tension, this weight. She let it stretch, let it burn, because the silence before the truth was the lesson. Collins drew in a breath, his chest rising, and then, with pride cutting into every word he spoke. Commander Sarah Mitchell, step forward. The world tilted. Time stopped. Marcus's stomach dropped. Jake's face drained pale. Danny swore under his breath, barely audible. Walsh blinked as though he hadn't understood the words. Sarah stepped forward, one stride, then another, her movements sharp, precise, fluid with authority. She turned to face the formation, the recruits staring at her with wide, stunned eyes. The woman they had mocked in the showers, the one they dismissed as weak, as small, as out of place. Their commander. The silence stretched long, heavier than the heat, heavier than shame. Marcus's chest constricted, every word he'd spoken in the showers crashing down on him like stones. Jake's mind replayed every laugh, every insult, each one twisting tighter. Danny stared at the ground, wishing it would open and swallow him whole. Sarah stood before them, her expression calm, professional. No smirk, no satisfaction, only command. Good afternoon, recruits, she said, her voice steady, carrying the kind of authority that comes not from rank but from blood and fire. From this moment on, I will be responsible for your training. Every decision you make, every word you speak, every movement you execute will determine whether you are fit to serve. Some of you will rise. Some of you will fail. That is your choice. Her eyes swept across them, steady, measured, unflinching. Several wanted to look away. None dared. "I have already observed you," she continued. "I've seen potential. I've also seen arrogance, disrespect, the kind of thinking that gets teams killed in real combat." Marcus's throat closed. Jake's knees weakened. Danny's fingers twitched. Sarah didn't flinch, didn't pause. Warriors are not measured by appearance, or by gender, or by volume of their voice. Warriors are measured by trust, by respect, by the ability to lead when it matters most. Her words cut deeper than any reprimand. They didn't just sting. They lodged like truth in places the recruits had never examined. Staff Sergeant Collins stepped forward, his eyes on them all. "Your new commander has more confirmed kills than anyone in this program. She has led rescue operations that saved lives where others would have given up. She has designed tactics that units across branches now follow. You will learn from her, or you will leave." The recruits stood frozen, sweat dripping, shame thick in their throats. Sarah let the silence hang once more. "Then your training begins now." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Because in that moment, every single one of them understood everything had changed. And nothing would ever be the same again. What was worse, her silence or her voice? The recruits stood stiff under the afternoon sun, their uniforms damp with sweat, their pride raw from the revelation. Every breath felt heavier, every heartbeat louder. They couldn't look at her the same way, not anymore. Sarah Mitchell stood before them now, not as a fellow recruit, not as the quiet shadow they'd mocked, but as commander. The weight of her presence was different, not shouted, not forced, simply there, undeniable. "Form into teams of 4, she said. Her tone was calm, but the authority in it pressed harder than any shout. The recruits scrambled, nerves betraying them. Marcus found himself with Jake, Danny, and Walsh, the same group from the showers. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Sarah watched them with a face of stone. She gave nothing away. "Your mission is simple," she explained. "You have 30 minutes to enter the mock village, locate a wounded soldier, and extract him. You will encounter resistance. You will face time pressure. You will make mistakes. I will see them, all of them." The recruits shifted on their feet, sweat rolling. Marcus swallowed hard. Jake rubbed his palms on his uniform. Danny muttered under his breath. Walsh's eyes darted like a trapped animal. Sarah's voice cut through. "This exercise isn't about who runs fastest or shoots straightest. It's about trust, leadership, the ability to function when everything goes wrong." Her gaze swept over them, sharp as glass. "And for some of you, everything already has." The whistle blew. The team rushed into the mock village, rifles raised, boots thudding against packed dirt. The plywood walls loomed, alleys twisting like mazes. Dust hung in the air, hot and stifling. Marcus took the lead, his voice barking orders. "Walsh left Jake with me." They stumbled forward, chaotic, uncoordinated. Walsh hesitated at the corner, leaving an open flank. A burst of paint rounds shredded the wall beside him, marking him dead in the first minute. "Damn it," Jake shouted. "Keep moving," Marcus yelled, but his own voice cracked. They pressed on. Paint fire cracked overhead. Danny fired wildly, hitting nothing, his nerves fraying. Jake's hands shook as he fumbled with his rifle. Marcus tried to project control, but every decision came too late, too loud. Sarah observed from a rooftop, her eyes following every movement, her expression unreadable. She saw it all, the hesitation, the shouting, the collapse of trust. She had seen it in real villages under real fire, where mistakes weren't corrected by another chance but by coffins draped in flags. The recruits stumbled into the rescue room. A dummy soldier lay sprawled on the floor, a red cross on his vest. Marcus bent to lift him, but his technique was sloppy. He dragged more than carried. Jake failed to cover properly, and a burst of rounds painted his chest. "Killed." Danny panicked, fired blindly, then froze. By the time the whistle blew again, the mission was incomplete. The wounded still lay behind. Only Marcus and Danny were technically alive. Their extraction had failed. Sarah descended into the dust like a shadow. She stood before them, her posture perfect, her silence louder than the gunfire had been. "Review," she said. Her voice was even, cold. Marcus shifted his weight, his face pale. We tried to secure the area, Commander. You failed to secure your flank," Sarah cut in. "You failed to cover your team. You failed to extract your asset. You failed to communicate." The words landed like blows, precise and devastating. Jake looked at the ground, shame burning through him. Danny's mouth opened, then closed again. Walsh stared blankly, already broken. Sarah's eyes lingered on Marcus. "You call yourself a leader, yet you left your men exposed. You barked orders but offered no direction. You chased control but earned none. In combat, that doesn't just make you ineffective, it makes you deadly to your own team." Marcus swallowed hard, his pride caving under the weight of truth. Sarah's voice remained steady. "This isn't high school football. This isn't a locker room where shouting makes you strong. Leadership is not volume. Leadership is responsibility. Responsibility for lives." The silence that followed was suffocating. Sarah scanned the group. "All of you carried arrogance into this program. You thought appearances told the story. You thought you could measure strength by size, by voice, by gender. You were wrong, and today you paid for it." Her tone sharpened. "If this had been real combat, 3 of you would be dead, and the 4th would be standing over bodies, realizing his mistakes too late." Marcus's throat tightened. The weight of her words pressed down like stone. Jake felt his stomach twist. Danny's hands shook, his notebook long forgotten. Sarah let the silence linger, then stepped closer. Her voice dropped low, cutting like glass. "In war, arrogance kills. Disrespect kills. Underestimation kills. If you carry those habits into combat, you won't just fail, you'll bury your brothers." Her eyes locked on Marcus. "Do you understand?" Marcus nodded, barely able to speak. "Yes, Commander." "Louder." "Yes, Commander." His voice cracked, stripped of bravado. She shifted her gaze to Jake. "Do you understand?" "Yes, Commander." Then Danny. Then Walsh. Each answer quieter than the last, but each carried something new. Fear, yes, but also the first flickers of humility. Sarah stepped back, her expression unchanged. "Good, because from this moment on, the games are over. This isn't about proving who you are to me. This is about proving who you are to yourselves, to the men you might one day lead, to the ones you'll have to trust with your life." She turned sharply, her boots grinding against gravel. "Again, reset the scenario. You have 15 minutes." The recruits froze, disbelief flashing in their eyes. 15 minutes. Less time, same mission, no excuses. But Sarah didn't flinch, didn't soften. Because war never did either. The second run went worse. Their nerves were shot, their minds cluttered. Marcus tried to lead but second-guessed every move. Jake flinched at every burst of fire. Danny hesitated so long that Walsh ran out of cover and took another round to the chest. By the 10-minute mark, they were broken. No asset, no cohesion, no survival. The whistle blew. Sarah walked into the dust again, her face as calm as stone. "Twice," she said quietly. "Twice you failed. Twice you died. Twice you proved your arrogance outweighs your discipline." Her words cut, not shouted, but deliberate, surgical. "You want to wear the trident. You want to claim the title. Then you have to learn that strength isn't in how hard you hit the wall. It's in how you stand for each other, how you cover each other, how you silence your ego long enough to keep your brothers alive." Her gaze swept the formation, steady, unrelenting. "Until you learn that, you are not warriors, you are liabilities." The recruits stood motionless, sweat streaking their faces, their shame carved deep. None argued, none protested. Because deep down, they knew she was right. That night in the barracks, the air was heavy again. Not with laughter this time, not with mockery, with silence. Marcus lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, every word of Sarah's critique replaying in his head. Leadership is responsibility. The phrase looped until it carved itself into him. Jake turned his dog tags in his hands, the metal cold against his skin. For the first time in his life, he questioned if he belonged here at all. Danny wrote nothing in his notebook. For once, the smirk was gone entirely. Walsh lay with his eyes open, unblinking, wondering if he would ever measure up. Sarah sat in her office that night, the light dim, reports scattered across her desk. She had seen this before, the humiliation, the collapse of arrogance, the silence that followed. She didn't enjoy it, she didn't relish it. But she knew it was necessary. Because arrogance killed, pride killed, and if she didn't strip it out of them now, it would strip their lives from them later. She leaned back, eyes closing for a brief moment. The scars on her back ached with memory. She thought of the men she had lost, the missions that had nearly broken her, the faces of those who never came home. That was why she was here, not to break them, but to rebuild them. The real work had just begun. Why did failure hurt more in silence? The recruits had stumbled back from the village exercise broken, stripped of bravado, their pride lying in the dust. Yet it wasn't the paint rounds or the heat that cut deepest. It was Sarah Mitchell's voice, calm, precise, merciless. Her words had lingered, echoing louder than gunfire. Arrogance kills, disrespect kills, underestimation kills. They couldn't laugh it off now, not anymore. The next morning began before the sun. "On your feet," Sarah ordered, her voice cutting through the darkness like a blade. Boots slammed the ground, recruits scrambling half awake. They had expected another day of shouting from Collins. Instead, Sarah stood in front of them, her posture sharp, her eyes steady, her silence demanding more than any scream. "This is not punishment," she said. "This is preparation. You will move. You will carry weight. You will suffer. And you will learn that suffering is not the enemy. Weakness is." No one spoke. No one dared. They ran. Miles across rough terrain, sand dragging at their boots, the horizon endless, packs heavy on their backs, straps biting shoulders, lungs heaving. Marcus gritted his teeth, his chest on fire, sweat streaming. Jake stumbled but forced himself forward, eyes locked on Sarah's back ahead of him. Danny cursed under his breath, his legs burning but didn't stop. Sarah ran as though the weight didn't exist. Her pace never faltered, her breathing steady, her stride a rhythm carved into her body from years of carrying men through fire. By the fourth mile, Marcus's legs threatened to give. By the fifth, Jake's vision blurred. By the sixth, Danny thought about quitting, but Sarah's voice cut through the storm of their exhaustion. "You think you can't move anymore. Then move once more. You think you're done. Then you begin again. Warriors are not made in comfort. They are made in pain." Her tone wasn't raised, but it carried, it cut. And somehow it made them keep going. The obstacle course became their crucible. Day after day, they climbed, crawled, leapt, fell, and tried again. The wall that had mocked them now stood as a mirror, reflecting not just muscle but will. Marcus attacked it with newfound patience, his movements no longer brute force but measured. Jake studied every handhold, learning technique instead of relying on speed. Danny, once quick to smirk, gritted his teeth and forced silence, failing, then trying again, his pride ground down until only persistence remained. Sarah watched everything. She saw every slip, every hesitation, every flicker of doubt. And she saw the growth, slow, painful, uneven, but there. She didn't praise them. Not yet. Praise was cheap. Growth had to be proven. The range tested them next. Targets lined in the distance, rifles heavy in their hands. The sun burned overhead, sweat stinging eyes. Jake steadied his stance, remembering Sarah's words about breath, about patience. His first shot hit closer, his second closer still. Not perfect, but controlled. Marcus exhaled, squeezed, hit center mass. Not tight like Sarah, but no longer scattered. Danny's hands trembled, but he forced himself to slow. His grouping still wide, but at least on the target. Sarah's shots cut through the center again, 3 holes where only one appeared. She never boasted, never explained. She simply set the standard by standing. And for the first time, Marcus didn't scoff. He stared at his own target, his pride burning less from shame and more from hunger to be better. The tactical drills came harder. Urban combat scenarios twisted them through alleys and corners, every decision magnified. Marcus tried to lead again, but this time his voice was steadier, his orders shorter, cleaner. Jake covered his angles with focus, his earlier carelessness replaced with urgency. Danny still stumbled, but he listened now, his ears open instead of ready with jokes. Sarah hovered near but never interfered unless she had to. When Marcus rushed too far, she yanked him back with one sharp command. When Jake froze at a corner, she barked a single word: move. When Danny panicked, she steadied him not with comfort but with demand: get up. They hated her for it in the moment. But in the silence afterward, lying in the dirt, lungs burning, they knew she hadn't broken them. She had held them to a standard they'd never held themselves. Night training stripped them bare. Under red flashlights, the world shrank to shadows and whispers. They learned to navigate in silence, to move as one. The fear of failure was sharper in the dark, the memory of Sarah's voice sharper still. Marcus, who once shouted for control, now spoke in low tones, guiding instead of demanding. Jake, once careless, now checked every corner twice, his nerves turning into discipline. Danny, once the joker, bit down on his tongue and forced his body to obey. Sarah watched from the dark, her eyes steady, her presence unseen but felt. Every stumble, every decision, every moment of fear, she noted them all, and she let them carry their weight because real growth came not from her hand holding them, but from them learning to hold each other. Weeks passed. The recruits changed, slowly, painfully. Marcus's body hardened, but more than that, his voice softened. He learned that strength wasn't shouting, it was listening. His arrogance chipped away until something steadier remained. Jake shed his bravado, replacing it with focus. He no longer laughed in the barracks. He studied, practiced, corrected. Humility replaced swagger. Danny, once all smirk and excuses, began to show flashes of leadership he never thought he had. Sarah had pushed him, harder than he thought he could take, but in that pressure, something new began to form. They weren't there yet, not close, but they were no longer the boys from the showers. One night after a brutal exercise under red lights, Marcus found himself beside Sarah at the map table. His hands trembled slightly as he traced the lines of the scenario they had just failed. His voice cracked when he spoke, quiet, almost swallowed by the dark. "Commander," he hesitated, I need to say something." Sarah looked up, her expression calm, unreadable. Marcus swallowed hard, his pride fighting against the words. "I was wrong from the start. I said things, stupid things. I laughed. I thought I knew who you were. I thought I knew what strength looked like. And I was wrong." Silence stretched. Sarah studied him, the dim red glow painting the exhaustion on his face. She had been waiting for this moment, not the apology but the recognition, the humility, the growth. Her voice was low, even. "Acknowledging your mistake tells me more about your character than the mistake itself ever did." Marcus blinked, the words landing heavy. Sarah's tone softened, just slightly. Real warriors are not defined by what they say in arrogance. They are defined by what they do after they've been broken. Marcus nodded, his throat tight. For the first time, he felt not just commanded by her, but guided. Jake, too, began to shift. In the following days, his jokes fell away. His hands steadied on his rifle. His eyes sharpened on his targets. He no longer compared himself to Sarah, he learned from her. Each correction she gave him, he absorbed. Each failure, he turned into fuel. Danny surprised himself most of all. In one late-night drill, when Marcus stumbled and Jake froze, Danny found himself giving the order. His voice was quiet, not confident, but it was there. And for once, the others followed. Sarah noticed. She never smiled, never praised, but she noted it. And that for Danny was enough. The barracks at night no longer carried laughter. No mocking, no arrogance. Instead, the silence was heavier but different now. Not shame, not bitterness. Determination. Marcus lay awake, his body aching but his mind sharper. Jake turned his tags in his hands, not in nervousness but in thought. Danny scribbled not jokes but notes, plans, reminders, small lessons. Walsh, who once drifted, now held focus, his eyes clearer. They were changing, slowly, painfully. And Sarah knew it. Because she had seen this before. Boys stripped to nothing, pride shattered, rebuilt not into perfect soldiers, but into men who could carry weight not just for themselves, but for each other. The transformation had begun. But the real test, the one that mattered, was still ahead. Why did the night feel heavier than the day? The desert was silent. No wind, no crickets, no hum of distant engines, just silence thick enough to press into their chests. The recruits stood assembled under red-filtered lamps, shadows drawn long across the ground. Their uniforms were streaked with dust, their eyes rimmed with exhaustion, but there was something different now. No jokes, no smirks, no bravado. Only focus. Sarah Mitchell stood in front of them, her posture sharp, her face unreadable. The weeks had stripped them down, rebuilt them piece by piece. She had seen the arrogance burned away, the pride broken, the boys reshaped into something that could, if they chose, become warriors. But this night would decide if that transformation was real. "This," Sarah said, her voice steady and low, "is your final evaluation exercise." The words carried across the group, heavy, unflinching. "You will operate in teams. You will navigate a hostile environment. You will locate and extract a wounded ally. You will encounter resistance. You will face fatigue, confusion, pressure. You will succeed together, or you will fail together." She let the silence stretch, her eyes moving from face to face. Marcus, jaw set, shoulders squared. Jake, eyes narrowed, dog tags tucked into his shirt. Danny, lips pressed tight, notebook long abandoned. Walsh, no longer nervous but focused, steady. Sarah drew in a breath. This exercise is not about muscle, it is not about speed. It is about trust, respect, the ability to carry each other when your strength fails. That is the measure of a warrior, nothing else. The recruit swallowed, the weight of her words sinking deep. Sarah's gaze hardened. "You have 1 hour, begin." They moved into the mock village, darkness pressing in, red lights barely enough to mark the path. The plywood walls loomed taller at night, the alleys narrower, every shadow threatening. Marcus led, but his voice was different now. Not shouting, not demanding, just firm, focused. "Jake, cover left, Danny, rear, Walsh with me." They obeyed without hesitation. Paint rounds cracked through the dark, snapping against walls, cutting the silence like whips. Jake dropped low, returning fire with controlled bursts. Danny shifted, his rifle steady, his breathing measured. Walsh moved tight to Marcus, their formation cleaner, sharper than ever before. Sarah watched from a rooftop, her eyes sharp, her heart steady. She had seen this before, boys entering the crucible, the fire either forging them or consuming them. Tonight would decide which. The first obstacle came fast. A blocked alley, debris piled high. Marcus signaled with his hand, no words wasted. Jake and Walsh shifted to cover angles while Danny checked the other side. "Over," Marcus whispered. They boosted each other, moving with quiet efficiency. Marcus climbed last, his boots scraping wood, his breath sharp. Danny reached down, pulled him the last few inches. No laughter, no smirks, just movement. Sarah noted it, the teamwork, the trust, the absence of arrogance. Enemy fire came again, closer this time. Paint rounds shredded a corner, sparks of dust exploding into the night. Jake pressed himself against the wall, his jaw tight, eyes locked forward. "Cover me," Marcus hissed. Jake nodded. No hesitation, no second guessing. He stepped into the line of fire, his weapon steady, bursts precise. Marcus sprinted across, dropped to a knee, and signaled the others. Danny followed, low and fast. Walsh covered the rear, his eyes darting, his rifle steady. They moved like a unit, not perfect, not polished, but together. Sarah watched, her chest heavy with something she rarely allowed herself to feel: hope. The wounded soldier lay in a darkened room, a dummy dressed in fatigues, blood bags taped to his vest. Marcus dropped to his knees, checked the straps. Jake secured the room. Danny watched the window. Walsh covered the door. "Lift," Marcus said quietly. Jake moved to help. Together they hauled the dummy onto Marcus's shoulders. The weight was crushing, dragging him down, sweat already soaking his back. "I've got it," Marcus grunted. But Sarah saw his legs tremble. She saw the pride flicker, the old pride that wanted to prove he could carry it alone. And then something new. "Jake," Marcus said, voice strained but steady, "take the legs." Jake moved instantly, grabbing the dummy's boots, lifting some of the burden. Danny shifted closer, ready to take over if needed. Walsh tightened their formation. The four of them moved together, slow but steady, the weight no longer Marcus, alone. Sarah felt her throat tighten. It was a small thing, but it was everything he had learned. The extraction route was chaos. Fire from both sides, simulated explosions shaking the ground, paint rounds slamming the walls. Danny stumbled, nearly dropping his weapon, but Marcus reached out, steadying him with one hand while still carrying the dummy. "Keep moving," Marcus barked, not loud, not desperate, firm, focused. Danny steadied, breath heaving, eyes locked forward. Jake fired short bursts, covering their advance. Walsh called out enemy positions with sharp precision, his voice low but clear. They moved alley by alley, every step earned, every corner dangerous. Sarah followed from above, her eyes never leaving them. She saw every mistake, every correction, every flicker of fear. But she also saw something else: trust where there had been arrogance, humility where there had been laughter. They weren't perfect, but they were no longer liabilities. The extraction point loomed at the far end of the compound, marked by a single red light. But the path was narrow, exposed. Marcus's chest heaved under the weight of the dummy. Jake's shoulders shook from recoil. Danny's legs wobbled. Walsh's eyes burned with exhaustion. And then an ambush. Paint rounds rained from both sides, walls lighting up, the air thick with simulated chaos. The recruits dove for cover, hearts pounding, ears ringing. Marcus pressed his back to the wall, sweat pouring, lungs on fire. The dummy's weight pressed him down, his legs threatening to buckle. "I can't," he started. But then Jake's hand shot out. "Give him here, I've got it." Marcus hesitated, pride fighting, but only for a second. Then he nodded, shifting the weight onto Jake's shoulders. Jake staggered, nearly dropping, but Danny and Walsh rushed to steady him. Together they lifted, supported, carried. Paint fire cracked around them. Dust filled their lungs. Their bodies screamed to stop. But they moved. Together. When the final whistle blew, the recruits collapsed into the dust at the extraction point, lungs gasping, sweat soaking through uniforms. The dummy lay beside them, mission complete. Sarah descended into the silence, her boots crunching against gravel. She stood over them, her shadow long in the red light. They stared up at her, too exhausted to speak, their faces raw, their pride stripped to nothing but grit. Sarah let the silence stretch. Then she spoke. "You succeeded." The words were simple, but they hit harder than any reprimand. Marcus's chest heaved, his eyes widening. Jake's head dropped forward, relief flooding through him. Danny let out a shaky breath, his hands trembling. Walsh closed his eyes, the weight of the moment pressing into him. Sarah's gaze swept them. "Not because you were fast, not because you were strong, but because you carried each other, because you trusted each other, because you learned that no one survives alone. Her voice softened just slightly. That is what it means to be a warrior. The recruits sat in silence, the truth carving itself into them. For the first time since that first night in the showers, they didn't see Sarah as small, or weak, or out of place. They saw her for what she was. A commander, a warrior, a leader. And for the first time, they saw themselves, too, not as boys playing at soldiers, but as men learning what it meant to become warriors. Back in the barracks that night, the silence was different again. No shame, no arrogance, only reflection. Marcus lay on his bunk, the words echoing, because you carried each other. He realized he had never carried anyone before, not really, and now he couldn't imagine not doing it. Jake turned his tags in his hand, not nervously but with pride. He had carried weight tonight and not just the dummies. For once, he had been more than his own body. Danny stared at the ceiling, his chest rising and falling, thinking about the moment when his voice had mattered, when others had listened. Walsh slept deeper than he ever had, exhaustion laced with something new, purpose. And Sarah sat alone at her desk, the light dim, her notes precise. She didn't smile, she didn't relax, she simply wrote, because she knew growth wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. But tonight, at least, they had taken their first real step. And she had given them that. Why did silence feel heavier than applause? The compound stood still under the morning sun. Flags stirred in the faint breeze. Boots scuffed against gravel as the recruits formed into ranks one final time. Weeks of pain, of failure, of sweat and humiliation had brought them here. And now there was no laughter, no mocking, no doubt. Only weight. The weight of what they had endured, the weight of what they had learned. Marcus stood taller than he ever had, not because his muscles had grown, though they had, but because his pride had been stripped to bone and rebuilt into something steadier. His jaw was set, but not in defiance, in readiness. Jake's hands no longer shook when they held his rifle. His eyes were calm, focused. The smirk that once lived on his lips had vanished, replaced by something sharper, humility. Danny looked thinner, harder, but the smirk was gone from him too. He didn't write jokes in his notebook anymore. Instead, he kept reminders, short lessons scrawled in messy ink. Don't rush. Listen. Carry weight. Walsh, who had once shrunk into the background, now stood level with the rest, his shoulders squared, his eyes steady. Sarah Mitchell walked down the line, her boots striking the dirt in even rhythm. Her gaze passed over each of them, sharp, unrelenting but not unfeeling. She saw what they had become, and more importantly, she saw what they had let go of. Colin stood off to the side, his arms crossed, his expression giving nothing away. But he knew as well as she did, this group was not the same. Graduation wasn't banners or fanfare. It wasn't cheering crowds. It was simply this, standing in the sun, listening to the words that would mark the end of their training. Colin spoke first. His tone was rough, his sentences short. He acknowledged their grit, their survival, their transformation. He reminded them that this was only the beginning, that real missions, real battles, would demand more than training ever could. Then he stepped aside. All eyes shifted. Sarah took his place. For a moment she said nothing. Her silence was the same silence that had cut them in the showers, on the course, in the dust of the village. But now it carried something different. Respect. Finally she spoke. When you arrived here, she said, her voice steady, you believed strength was measured by noise, by who shouted the loudest, by who looked the strongest, by who laughed the hardest. Her eyes swept the line, meeting each of theirs in turn. You learned quickly that noise fades, that muscles tire, that laughter dies in the face of fear. Her tone sharpened. Strength is not noise. Strength is not arrogance. Strength is carrying weight when your body breaks. Strength is giving when you have nothing left. Strength is looking at the man next to you and deciding that his life matters more than your pride. The recruit stood frozen, her words carving into them like stone. Sarah drew a breath. Her next words carried softer but heavier. I was laughed at, mocked, dismissed. I have been underestimated more times than I can count. And still I stand here, not because I shouted louder, not because I proved them wrong once, but because I learned that dignity does not argue. It acts. The silence that followed was total. Marcus's throat tightened. He remembered that first night in the showers, the cruel laughter, the smirks. He felt shame burn hot in his chest, but also gratitude. Jake's eyes stung. He remembered mocking her behind her back, whispering doubts, and now he could hardly believe the arrogance of it. Danny swallowed hard, his notebook heavy in his pocket. He thought of every word he had wasted, every joke that had been armor against his own fear. Walsh simply stared, unblinking, letting her words sear into him. Sarah's gaze softened just slightly. You are not finished. This is not a medal. This is a beginning. Every choice you make from this moment forward will define you, not as recruits, not as graduates, but as men. And one day, when you face the silence of real battle, when no one is watching, when no applause waits, you will remember this. Dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. It carries. It endures. It acts. Her final words landed like a hammer wrapped in silk. Carry each other, or you carry nothing. The ceremony ended without celebration. Just a dismissal. Just boots crunching on gravel as the recruits filed out, their faces heavy, their hearts changed. Later in the barracks, Marcus sat on his bunk, his uniform jacket folded neatly beside him. He turned his dog tags in his hands, not with arrogance, not with doubt, but with quiet pride. He had failed, fallen, been broken, and risen differently. Jake sat at the small desk, his rifle across his lap, cleaning it with slow, deliberate care. He hummed under his breath, not laughter, but something steadier, calmer. Danny scribbled one last note in his book before closing it for good. Dignity doesn't speak. It acts. Walsh lay back on his bunk, eyes closed, for the first time feeling like he belonged. Not because he was flawless, but because he had endured. And Sarah. She sat alone in her office, the lamp casting a faint glow over her desk. Papers stacked, reports filed, silence filling the room. She leaned back, eyes closed for a brief moment, and let herself breathe. She had seen this before. Boys broken, rebuilt, reshaped. Some made it, some didn't. These had made it, but only just, and she knew the world ahead of them would demand even more. But for tonight, at least, she allowed herself the smallest flicker of something she almost never let in. Hoping. The night fell quiet, the compound stood still, and the recruits, now soldiers, slept under the weight of everything they had learned. The memory of laughter in the showers faded. What remained was heavier, sharper, and far more permanent. The lesson Sarah had carved into them with sweat, with silence, with relentless truth. That dignity doesn't shout, it doesn't argue. It simply acts. And sometimes, that is enough to change everything.